Every year from the 25th of November to the 10th of December, the world marks the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This year marks 30 years since the iconic Beijing conference, where women around the world came together to fight for their liberation, dignity, and safety. Here at Legally Clueless, we've teamed up with UN Women to spotlight African changemakers from across the continent and across generations who are doing their part to end gender-based and sexual violence. And in this episode, we meet Professor Ambassador Maria Nzomo, the first Kenyan lady to get a PhD in political science and has for decades fought for women's rights.
My name is Maria Nzomo. I'm a professor of the university, specifically at the University of Nairobi, Kenya. I have served this country, Kenya, as an ambassador for 6 years. So I'm also an ambassador, a retired ambassador now. I'm also a human rights and especially gender activist, and I've been doing that for years. I don't regard it as a profession. I regard it as something I do because, I want to serve my country, and especially to serve women and all others whose rights are being abused. So it is one of those voluntary things you do because you feel you have a responsibility. In my case, this started quite early, even before I knew anything about gender, about human rights, about activism, or any of that stuff. Just being concerned about some of the things I thought looked to me terribly unfair and horrifying to me as a very young girl, growing up in a rural environment, and I watched as men just abused women. Sometimes young women abusing people old enough to be their own mothers and grandmothers, physically just slapping them and insulting them and doing all manner, really of violation. I didn't know all those technical terms then about gender-based violence and all of that. But that really bothered me, and I kept asking, why isn't nobody concerned? Because these women would be, you see them crying, and they are men who supposedly are the clan leaders, and they are doing nothing about it. In other words, very normalized behavior, but which was horrifying to me as a kid. And I said, I would never want to, to go through this kind of thing. And if there was something I would be able to do about it, I would do it. And that, if you want, that's the starting point for me. Before I even knew all these now fancy things we know about how matters of gender-based violence, and all of that. So I was not particularly educated. And those days they didn't teach, anything related to issues of gender or male-female relationships, or etc. And I have to tell you, that's also when I saw one of the things that I just was lucky to escape, and that is female genital mutilation. Because, back in the days, it was normalized. Every female must have had to go through female genital mutilation. If you didn't, you are not considered not being a woman, and nobody would even want to marry you, etc. But then I saw a contradiction that most of the girls, the young girls who went through the female genital mutilation, many of them, they didn't even finish primary school. Because immediately now, because you're being told you are mature, you are old, and never mind all the pain they had to put you through, cutting you up and so on, the men now start taking advantage just now, and even family allow you. You can just go and do whatever you want. You have no, sex education. So what happens next? In that level of ignorance, they get pregnant. And what happens next? They leave school. That's the end of their lives. And I said, nah, that's not the life I want. I kept telling myself, when I grow up, this is one of the issues I would want to address if I'm in a position to. I finished my formal education in the 1980s. By that finishing, I mean getting everything, including my doctorate. And I joined the University of Nairobi immediately. I was hired as a lecturer. And And I'm going back there because, in terms of officially getting involved in the women's movement and all of that, that's where the journey starts. And I was one of very few women who, within a university that is, we got together, a very small group of us, and we decided to form a research group, gender research group, on women and all the various issues that that concerned me much earlier, but I didn't know how to deal with them. And we created a chapter of a regional organization which is there up to this date. It's called the African Association of Women for Research and Development, AWOD, which we then used it as a base because the university had no interest at all in matters gender. In fact, they literally blocked us from even developing curriculums in a field. So this now was our own thing. We were trying to find a space. Friends of mine like Professor Ajiku Kabera, we were together in that little group. And we had no funding, no nothing. We were used to meet at night, sometimes in places without electricity. We go there with the candles to, after we have finished with our normal work. So that is my starting point. And I recall that each one of us took a particular topic on which to focus. This was long before Beijing. Issues, some of us took the economy, those who are specializing in the economy, women and the economy. Someone else would take something, women and the law. And because of my background, I took as my area of specialization in terms of research of women in governance and especially in politics and decision-making, public decision-making. So my first seminal paper, which up to this date I think it is the best piece of writing I have done, was called Women in Politics and Public Decision-Making, looking globally, statistically, to see where were the women, what was happening to them. And of course, the glaring statistic was the marginality of women in every area of power. And that in itself spoke millions about why so much damage was being done to women, and there were no women to speak for other women in decision-making. And that paper was published by our media. And of course, I was angry at that time because I was saying that this is not a piece of journalistic literature. It's a serious research document. You are abusing my rights. You didn't ask me permission. But it turned everything around. This was now towards the end of the 80s, starting to the 90s. That's actually how I got into the public space. I was pushed in by the media because now I had to defend my rights and to explain what I meant in that paper. A 30-page paper, well-researched paper. And that is one piece of writing, like I say, I'm really, really proud of. And having started there, even before that decade ended, you recall that the United Nations had created a decade just for women from 1975 to 1985. And that was the very first initiative by the UN to force the world to think about women. So we were also writing on that, our research group, that there was a UN decade, dedicated to women, and we should also input into that process. And so therefore, 1985 decade conference to close the decade, which had started in 1975 to 76, guess what? The World Conference was held at my University of Nairobi. In fact, there were two conferences back to back. There was what they were calling the formal conference for governments and heads of states and government, which was held at KICC. And it was called a forum, a global forum, with women activists, scholars, those people who are not government. About 5,000 women congregated at our university. In fact, we had to close down the entire main campus and donate to them for, and that whole compound, which used to be called the Great Court. And guess what? I was right in the thick of it. Free conference, I didn't have to pay anything. And I just was absorbing all this information like a sponge. And I was just saying, thank you, God. You don't have to go very far now to get to understand that there's something very wrong in this world. It's not just here in Kenya, but it's elsewhere. And so I picked a lot of information then, and that's what drove me even further to be convinced that we needed to do something. And that something is what started this, even before Beijing. Beijing now came. It was actually, Beijing was the fourth conference. It building on the UN decade conferences, which were 3, and that's why it was being called the fourth conference, the Beijing Conference of 1995. The 1985 conference, to close the UN decade, is the one that came up with what they call the forward-looking strategies for addressing the issues of concern for women, and which were put in 3 pillars: peace pillar, equality pillar, and the development pillar. And I think it is from that Beijing now operationalized those 3 pillars into what we saw as the outcome coming out of Beijing. So everybody was looking forward to Beijing to be that space now where we are going to force government, because this conference was essentially for governments and heads of states and government. And I remember the US was represented by Hillary Clinton, who was then, she was Secretary of State or something at that time. And she really made a very important statement that women's rights are human rights, and gender-based violence was also put as one of those areas of abuse of human rights. It cannot be normalized in any way. So there was a lot of excitement and hope that things were going to get better. And the world was now much more aware than it was before because of those other earlier meetings. And the Kenyan delegation going to Beijing was quite big. And it was led by a woman. It was then the only woman minister in government at that time, Nyiva Mwendwa. But there were 2, of course, delegations, the government one and then the parallel one, the informal one, which is all the NGOs and their representatives, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, Beijing is the one which seems most people have caught up with and they talk about. But like I said, this background is very, very crucial because Beijing did not just pop up from nowhere. But what Beijing did is actually to broaden and to, even amplify some of the key issues that had not been amplified, like gender-based violence. That's when it really came out very prominently, including the how of dealing with it, which had also not been addressed. I think that, for me at that time, I think the major achievement is that, even in places where you don't have a space, no space is created for you, you can create one and make an issue begin to be the beginning, the seeds of change. Because from that point on, we not only continued with the research that we were doing, and as I say, for me, it transformed everything in terms of even government noticing that there is something called women in politics and public decision making, because it was taken for granted. It is not a big deal if women are not in politics. They have other things they can be doing. Governance issues are really male stuff. And they were saying, no, people cannot be making decisions on your behalf and you are sitting in the margins. You have to either be very well represented, and it is all part of gender equity and equality. That it's not just a matter of even just being present; it's also about influencing the decisions that are being made. And in a sense, the research process started there, because then we started pushing for curriculum change at the university, which there was no gender at all. I had a huge fight myself because I was in a very, if you want, the most patriarchal, institution, part of the department where I was. Nothing about gender at all. And when I started insisting on it, and I was the only woman again, the rest of my colleagues were male, they wouldn't say anything. They would just ignore me. 4 years, it was just pushing and pushing. And finally, I managed to push 3 courses. But it was a huge struggle. And that tells you something about, the area of gender in women. It is all enmeshed with the culture and values, which are really, really, can I say, very internalized by society. And to change them, it is like trying to go through a wall of stone. And it takes long and a lot of persistence. But the beginnings of that research is what gave us the strength to keep pushing, to keep pushing. Now we have programs. We even have a Center for African Women Studies at the University of Nairobi, which is progress. And the departments also have mainstreamed the study of women and gender issues. So it has changed something. And I was part of it, so I feel very proud about what, the little we were able to accomplish. But it was not easy work. It was very hard. If you are soft and you didn't have hard skin, you are able to have strong shock absorbers, you couldn't survive it. Because sometimes you would be isolated completely, even by people who know you and they are your friends. In 1991, and this is to do with gender-based violence directly, there was a huge, I would call it, case of, it's more than just a tragedy. It was, a huge case of human rights violation of women, gender-based, in one of the high schools in Kenya called St. Kizito. It was a mixed high school where boys and girls were in the same boarding school. And, the whole story is not important. What is important is that the boys who outnumbered women in the school attacked the girls, right? Attacked them and abused them physically, but specifically raping them. Some 71 girls, if I'm not wrong. The deputy head of that school, who was a woman, when she was asked by the media, why would you, allow this to happen? Where were you all? She said, the boys did not mean any harm. They just wanted to rape. And I said, what the hell? What world does she live in? The boys meant no harm. They just wanted to rape. Yes, obviously a lot have changed since then. I don't think you'd say that now, but it just tells you just how, how deep some of these cultural values are. And for me, my reaction was immediate, because by that time I was already in the media because of all the work I was doing. So the media called me. I actually hadn't, because of the communication. Remember, there were no internet in those days. You had to wait for a newspaper the following day to read something. And they called me, and I was minding my own business. It was on a Saturday. And asked me, are you aware about this situation in St. Kizito? And I said, what am I supposed to know? So they summarized for me. And they asked me, what's your opinion? And I just said the first thing I could think of, because I was just furious. And I said, you really want to know exactly what I think and should be done? I think those concerned, we shouldn't even start talking about it, taking them to court, to be tried, given bail, then maybe if you are lucky, they are put for 2 years or 1 year and then sent free. They should be castrated so that they will never, ever do that to any other woman again. And they should feel the pain of dehumanization and mental torture that rape causes. Of course, that got me into a whole lot of trouble, because I look back and I say, I don't know whether I would be able to do that again if I had to do it now, because they said they have to put that on record. Say I had to appear on TV, so it was a whole country knew what I had said, and The university, the men wouldn't talk to me. I should, how can I condone people being harmed? And I said, so you don't think rape is harming? And of course, even if some women thought I was too extreme, but I have no regrets even today, because it made people start thinking, and actually that became an issue, a debate about this kind of thing, should it be tolerated? An anti-rape organization was created specifically for, around the question of rape by women, led by one particular woman who, she is still, I'm very proud of her. She really fought hard, almost single-handedly to sustain that organization. And then, of course, other, women's organizations created their own sub-programs within their own institution. So my speaking out, although it was considered extremely radical, helped a great deal, I think, in raising awareness and getting people to start, debating the issue of rape and whether we should just take it lightly. It is a constant fight, because it is like a moving target. You have to keep chasing it. And it is, especially cultural matters, and they are normalized in society. It will take very many multiple strategies to really, eventually get to the root and remove all that and encourages that. So I would say continue the fight. A lot of us, the older women, we have given, already passed on the baton, but we are available for consultation. And myself, more and more, I'm saying we need intergenerational conversation, even have meetings. There has to be also a space where both male and female, meet and talk about these issues, because even men are violated. It's not just the women. The issues we are dealing with, especially now, we are lucky enough not just to have laws, but also to have, channels. Technology has created a whole new environment that, facilitates communication and makes it easier for, these kinds of dialogues to take place. And you don't get tired even if you feel like you have gone 2 steps up and you have slided another 3. You feel like you are still rotating around the same spot. You have moved. Just keep pushing. And do what you are able to do. All of us, that's all we have to do, what we are able to do. And then, at least you look back and say, I did this. And then by the time you are passing on the baton, you have something to be proud of. Yeah.